if it's the truth, it doesn't change.
That's right.
Why is it always changing? And then you're using words. They use such deceptive, dangerous words like spiritual poison and apostasy and the truth. And they equate themselves, the governing body. Basically what they're saying is the governing body is Jehovah. That's really what they're saying. Because if you question it, if you question, well, you're questioning Jehovah, aren't you?
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, this is Lady C.
And this is JT.
Welcome to The Critical Thought. So, Darrin, we want to welcome you to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so honored to be here with you on Critical Thought.
Well, we're glad to have you here. We know it's been a little time trying to get back together, but we're glad that we were able to get together this morning.
Yes, thank you so much.
So, Darrin, we really thank you for being on the program, and we would like for you to tell us a little bit about your experience and how you became one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
I'm from Jersey City. My mother started studying in 1971 with a friend that she grew up with. They lived down the street from my grandparents' home in Jersey City, New Jersey. To give you some background, what I didn't know at the time, I was 4 years old. My parents were separated, and my mother was vulnerable. And so the woman that lived up the street, they were childhood friends. She started talking to my mom about the truth. That's when, that's back, I think it was when the Great Teacher book was out, I believe. And all I can remember is that my mom started having this woman in her house like once or twice a week, studying with her. And I knew they were studying from the Bible. And my mom got baptized in 1971. And at that time, her and my father got back together. And my father started studying. And he got baptized in 1972. However, between 1971 and 1972, my parents moved to a place called Ewing Township, which is just outside of Trenton, New Jersey. And so that's how that was how I was how I grew up in the Jehovah's Witness organization. And I was from 5 years old up until 5 years ago. I was active as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, off and on, for periods of time.
That's interesting that you're saying that. So I'm under the impression that perhaps you said that your parents you said they were separated at the time?
Yeah, my father, couldn't stay out the street. He tells me that his father, who was kind of a enforcer, told him, take your so-and-so back home. I don't want to hear nothing more about you in the street. And if I find out you're in the street, I kill you. So my father came back home. And later on, my dad would admit to me that he only really became one of Jehovah's Witnesses to save his marriage. And he had moments of honesty with me, a little bit too late, but he admitted that he never really wholeheartedly dedicated himself to Jehovah. It was kind of to save his marriage, and
well, that's interesting because, like, I'm assuming, and like you said, he went back home, right? And then the religion is there waiting for you to take part. And now you're thinking, hey, look, if I join this religion, then maybe this will save my marriage. But,
and my father was a salesman, right? 11th grade education, dropped out of high school in the 11th grade, retired as a vice president of territory sales for a major pharmaceutical company. However, my dad went to school with Vernon Powell, and I forgot another guy who later became the vice president of Philip Morris. So if you know anything, JT, you're from North Carolina, if you know about tobacco. So while he was studying, the elders were pressuring my dad to leave his job. My dad probably would have been a millionaire had he kept that job easily, because when his friend became vice president, my dad would have probably been high up in the Philip Morris company as far as sales. Fortunately for him, he was able to get a job with a pharmaceutical company in sales and did very well. But that was one of those things where they kind of dictated the kind of jobs you had, career path you went down. But because my dad was a salesperson and the elders in the congregation at the time, I would say, I don't know how many elders there were, but probably the majority of them were in sales. So it was that kind of congregation elder structure. People were very good at, giving talks and, going door to door, talking to people. My dad was very charismatic. So he quickly, I think by 1974, my dad became an elder. And that was relatively quick, from getting baptized in 72 to being an elder in 74. But see, at that period of time, there was a great need for people. And so because of who my dad was, and I'd say maybe 2 or 3 years after being an elder, my dad became the PO, which they don't call it PO anymore. And he ran the food service, was one of the brothers that ran the food service. He gave talks. Later became a temporary circuit overseer. And my dad was I don't remember if it was district overseer. I don't know if they had a position called the district overseer. But he was the chairman for years at Vet Stadium. Which is where we went to our district assembly. And our circuit assembly was in Buckingham, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you remember Buckingham, Pennsylvania Assembly Hall.
Yeah, I remember that period of time was during the 70s when the smoking issue came out.
Mm-hmm.
Witnesses had to stop smoking within 6 months, or you're going to be disfellowshipped. The reason I know is like you mentioned, I'm from North Carolina, and during that time, tobacco was the number one cash crop for the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of businesses that were built around either directly with tobacco or they supported the infrastructure for tobacco. And a lot of brothers I know they end up losing their jobs as well, or either they lost privileges or got this fellowship. I mean, it was really bad. And so I can see the situation your dad was in. And of course, during that time, it was just explosive growth. I'm listening to the dates that you're given.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these dates are pre-1975,
Mm-hmm.
which means basically anybody who was coming in and studying, they had the 6 months program going. They was just throwing folks in the water, everybody coming out, dry them off, move on. And a lot of people became elders and ministerial servants because they simply was just so much growth going on at that time. And And I can understand that. One of the things that you mentioned, and I think me and Lady C, we've often talked about this, is how the organization always finds itself on people's doors of those who have problems or issues. And of course, the message just resonates. I mean, Watchtower, I have no problem acknowledging that Watchtower has probably one of the best products in terms of religion.
Yeah.
I mean, they sell a very good product.
Yeah.
You just can't get delivery of it, but they
they prey on people's vulnerability. They prey on people's vulnerability. My mother was the oldest of two children. It's her and my uncle. My grandmother worked 2 jobs. Her and my grandfather separated when my mother was like 6 or 7 years old. So she had to take care of my uncle. And then she got married. My mother had never been with any other man. She was, my dad was her only boyfriend, her first love. And so when her and my dad split up, that traditionalist generation, my mother put up with a lot. And my dad just couldn't stay out of the street. He was a street person. And his job really kind of lended to him being able to stay in the street, because he had all of New Jersey, he had Staten Island and parts of New York, parts of Brooklyn, I believe, was his territory. So, my dad most of the time was not home, except for meeting nights and on the weekends when we were out, had to be out in field service. But during the week, my dad didn't come home till 9, 10 o'clock. Friday night, Saturday night, he'd be in the street till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning sometime. So one of the things I found interesting as I really started to think critically with the career paths that the society makes people choose. My dad sold cigarettes, right, in the beginning, and then he switched from cigarettes to selling baby formula and, that kind of thing. But there were elders and ministerials in the congregation that worked in the prison. And they had, you're not supposed to be in a position where you might have to take somebody's life. They made 6 figures, retired as lieutenant, captain, been in, worked down Trenton State Prison and other places, workhouse in Trenton. And they, they had to transport prisoners, as armed guards. And I said to myself, what's the difference between that and a policeman on the street? You still have to be in a position, you still place yourself in a position where you might have to take somebody's life. And I know the society at that time was, was admonishing people not to take those kind of jobs, but they certainly allowed these people to become elders and serve in the congregation with these type of jobs.
Yeah, can I ask a question? I want to step back a second. I want to really kind of cover the part about your father being an elder, and you're talking about these late nights that he's spending. Mm-hmm. So during the time of this activity, is he still serving as an elder?
Yeah, my dad served as an elder from 1974 up until after I graduated from high school. So that was 84, 85, 86. He served as an elder.
Okay.
Now, mind you, when I got to be about 15, as you come into manhood, I started seeing some of the things. My dad was still smoking cigarettes. He was hanging out. There was evidence that he was messing around out there in the street. When I got to be about 17, I used to steal my dad's car every night. And, I would find stuff in the car other than cigarettes, but I would find stuff in the car and I knew what he was doing. But because I was an elder's kid, preacher's kid, I had to toe the line. And so that for me was the beginning of me really having a resentment towards my father. My mom died as a result of smoking. My mom smoked cigarettes from the time she was 16 years old up until she died at 76. She never stopped.
Yeah, that's amazing because here you have your father serving as an elder. Now, was your mother a pioneer or anything?
No.
Okay.
My mom auxiliary pioneer.
Okay.
Back in the 70s when they came up with the term auxiliary pioneer, I think it was 30 hours or 45 hours, something like that.
I think that was like 75 at one time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. So when you went to the Kingdom Hall, were you guys like a stellar example in the congregation to people? Everybody thought you guys were the model family.
Yeah, I mean, because I was an only child. I didn't, I dressed the way I dressed because my father was impeccably dressed. It had to look right. And, my dad was under pressure from the society as an elder, as a temporary circuit overseer, as a presiding overseer, to have everybody in line. But what I will say is we didn't ever had a personal study. My dad, he never really, there would be times when they had the campaigns about personal study and, family study and all that kind of stuff where he would kind of enforce that for about a week, and then it would go right back to, us just going out on Saturday, Sundays, not prepared. I never really studied the Bible on my own. I never had a personal study with either one of my parents. So there was no real Jehovah's Witness order in our house behind closed doors. But when, in the neighborhood, at school, anywhere else I had to be representative of one of Jehovah's Witnesses kids. And
well, that's amazing. What about your schooling? What was your life like when it came to, like sports, extracurricular activities, when you want to get involved in different things? I understand that you were good in music. And so you want to give us a little bit of backstory about that?
Yeah, when in 1972, when we moved to Trenton, I was in first grade. And I can remember we moved in October. It was the end of October. So the first day that I entered first grade, the next day I think it was like on a Thursday. The next day they were having a Halloween party, and my mom brought me to school, and she explained to them that we're Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't celebrate holidays. And, I didn't know anything about them. I'm 6 years old. I didn't know anything about that. And that was the beginning of me feeling alienated. and feeling the pressure of being different. And at that age, you're very impressionable, and the kids didn't know, like they looked at me like I was strange. Like they sat me over in the corner while the other kids had cupcakes and candy corn, and they kind of went from classroom to classroom trick or treating, and I sat in the back in the little sandbox by myself. And I can remember, when you went to school at that time, they had like the moms would come and be like the teacher's aide, help the teachers out. So this one woman, she felt so sad, so sorry for me. She slid me a cupcake, and she took the icing off of it because it had Happy Halloween on it. And I was, she would always do that up until I got out of elementary school. She would always, slide me some candy or a piece of cake or something like that if somebody had a birthday. But growing up, I got into music. I wanted to play sports. I was a pretty decent athlete too. But one of the things I would say that the Jehovah's Witness organization did for me was, that it places a lot on you as a child. You're told not to associate everybody that's not in the organization is evil and ungodly, and you're waiting for, that's a heavy load for a child to carry into your teenage years. You're waiting for the end of the world to come. You're looking at your friends knowing that they're going to die, and my father, more so than my mom, really alienated me from my peers. They couldn't come to the house and feel comfortable. He would always say, we're Jehovah's Witnesses. My son is not going to do this and do that. So I was never allowed to play sports. However, because most of the time with the practices after school and then the games were on meeting night or on the weekend when we were out in field service, had to be out field service. So I couldn't play sports, even though I was, from time to time, I was allowed to play in leagues because the leagues didn't interfere. I played soccer and I played tennis. But my dad was all about letting me take music lessons. So I started taking music lessons. I was a drummer. I was 10 years old when I started playing drums. And I got really good. And so when I got into junior high up into my senior year, I was in all of the marching band, stage band, orchestra. We had competitions. And because the games were on Friday night, the meeting was Thursday night, or it was Saturday afternoon, so I could go out in field service and then still make the game in the afternoon. And a lot of other witness kids were in the marching band or flag girls and, that kind of thing. But I got really good, and I started playing with guys who were like graduated in 72 to about 78. And we had a band that was one of the top bands, high school bands in New Jersey. And I played with them. I would sneak out a lot to go play with them in bars. I wasn't old enough to get in. But my dad allowed me to do that because he knew them. There's a couple guys that worked for the township that my dad got to know. So he allowed me to associate with them. But it was still always one of those things where I lived a double life, the things I did and the lies I had to tell and the things I had to do to get away from my parents to be able to do the things that I enjoyed. It was a lot. It was a lot to carry.
Yeah, it's amazing how one of the things the organization ends up forcing so many of us to do, we have to do that double life. You made the point about your dad didn't really do family study and that kind of stuff. And it was kind of sad when you think about how in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, everything is about image.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have like the super, we've had individuals on the program who, their parents make them study every page of the Watchtower, read every paragraph in the Awake magazine because they want the image. And then you have other witness parents who don't require it of their children or in their family, but they want to present that outside image when they step into the Kingdom Hall or when they step at their assembly hall, that these are the things that we do on a regular basis. So you throughout the entire organization, from the rank and file publisher round up to the highest levels, everything revolves around the image. Mm-hmm. Keeping as we say, keeping the brand looking good. That's all we cared about.
But you know what? It's interesting. Like when I look back, my dad, like I had friends in the congregation, peers or whatever, and we did the same things in the congregation that the kids in the neighborhood was doing. You know, especially when we got teenagers, you know, drinking and doing other substances, things like that. I tell my wife sometimes, you know, we used to be at the assemblies and halftime we'd be sitting in. You remember they used to have in the 70s they had those conversion vans where everybody had customized vans. Well, there was a couple of families whose kids were like 4 or 5 years older than me, so they were driving. But we were sitting in the van outside the assembly drinking cases of beer, you know, partying on, you know, during the intermission and going back in the assembly, you know, feeling good, getting through the assembly because most of us were going to the assembly just to, you know, to prowl, looking for the girls and girls looking for the guys. You know that culture that a lot of people don't know the culture that exists in the organization when they go to the assemblies or they go to meetings. Those from the outside, they don't know that it's not much different than any other place, the church or any other organization. You know, when you're a teenager, you're a young adult, you know, you're forced with the things that you encounter going through those stages of life. And so for me, a lot of the negative behaviors that I got into growing up started right in the hall. I can remember I started smoking marijuana at about 16, I think. And I can remember my father found some roaches in the ashtray. And I at first was gonna lie about it. And I said, you know what, let me just tell the truth. And I figured maybe if I told the truth, you know what, that night was on a Thursday night. I walked into the hall and here comes three elders talking about, we want to talk to you. There's been something brought to our attention. That's when they used to mark people. I don't know if you remember that. When they used to mark people. But I was unbaptized, so there was nothing that they could really do to me. But they wanted me to tell on everybody that I was, you know, if there was any, they would ask me, is anybody in the congregation that's doing this? And, you know, of course, I wasn't going to do that. But a lot of my peers in the hall stopped associating with me because they figured because my father was who he was, they didn't want to get exposed. So a lot of people that I would have hung out with more kind of avoided me because they didn't want to get caught out there.
Oh yeah, the big thing was with us, if you want to mate, meet at gate 8. And so everybody knew at the assemblies. Just crazy stuff, man. Just crazy stuff.
I think it's good that you're kind of talking about this because, you know, when people see Jehovah's Witnesses, they have this squeaky clean image and everybody's thinking that, you know, everything looks good on the outside. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the inside that people just don't know about.
Listen, when we had a lot of witness families in our neighborhood, right? And so that was when the society was really discouraging or encouraging parents to discourage their children from associating with anybody in the neighborhood that wasn't in an organization. But fortunately and unfortunately for me, there was a lot of witness families in the neighborhood I grew up in. However, our parents partied together. So there was 2 or 3 families that I kind of became family, extended family. But my parents on a Friday, Saturday night, man, they'd be drinking and listening to music and dancing and hanging out like they was in a bar. And you know, when you're young, you don't pay attention to how much and how off the hook these parties were. But when you look back on it, and when I talk to, it's amazing when I talk to other kids who grew up in the hall that no longer in an organization, they tell me, man, I'm amazed at some of the stories you're talking about. You know, how many elders were giving talks drunk, coming to the Kingdom Hall drunk. You know, we had 2 elders that could drink a half a fifth of scotch a day and come to the Kingdom Hall and give parts and counsel people and all that. And there was some elders that I knew they drank because you could smell the liquor coming out of their pores. My dad, there was several times there was some really shady stuff going on. My dad had a guy who he studied with, later became a PO, who worked for the public advocate, went somewhere, got drunk, and because of who he was, he had a badge. They called my dad. This is twice this happened. They called my dad at like 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. My father had to go into Pennsylvania to get him because they weren't going to take him to jail. But they didn't want to, expose a public servant who this guy, he was pretty high up in the city government, and he was a PO in a congregation at the time. So my dad had to go get him and take him home. There was one time where my father was in a club. They used to go hang out. We lived across the bridge from Pennsylvania. And there were a lot of bars that my dad and some of the elders would hang out in because it was like a place where nobody would find them. But this one particular night, my dad, and he was a PO at the time, he was sitting at the bar talking to some woman, and he was getting ready to light up a cigarette, and he turned around and he saw 4 or 5 of the friends from the congregation. And it's interesting because of it's the politics that's played in the congregation. Nobody said nothing to him. Well, one of my mother's friends came up to him and said, you ain't supposed to be doing this, and I ain't gonna say no, but you need to get your act together. That's all I was saying to my dad, and there was a lot of that kind of stuff, covering up stuff in the congregation, because if you were an elder or if you were the son of a PO or a circuit overseer or somebody that's high up, a lot of times, stuff was covered up or glossed over. You didn't get the full wrath of the Judiciary Committee. And so for years, my dad and other elders, there was elders in the congregation, there's 2 elders that put their wives in the hospital on more than one occasion. And the brothers knew about it. They didn't do nothing about it. So, that's how I grew up. And, I think people need to know the truth about what goes on, because when I talk to other people who grew up in an organization, it's such a common story. It's like, I was naive for a long time. People just don't know the kind of stuff that goes on in the organization, especially on the congregation level. What's being exposed now is the organization, but people need to know what goes on in the congregation. And there's a lot of stuff that people don't know about. There's a whole counterculture.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because since we've been activists online, we may encounter people that will look at our channel and they'll start saying, "Why are you attacking the Jehovah's Witnesses? These are some of the nicest people that you'll ever meet."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know everybody didn't live the way you're explaining.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember when my mom was studying and she was getting ready to get baptized, the elder in the congregation that was studying with my mom, him and his wife,
mm-hmm.
they partied at our house every Friday. I was a little kid. I was like 7, but they partied.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was friends with them for years after
mm-hmm.
she got baptized. But I think when mom got baptized, I think her partying kind of came to an end.
Yeah.
But the couple that was studying with them, they would come over there, and my dad was military. And so they had other military people over to the house as well. So they like hanging out with the military people.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy.
Yeah,
that's so true. And the thing of it is that it kind of goes against what Jehovah's Witnesses often advocate, that we're the same around the world. There's so many things that go in this organization. We look at like the Catholic Church and we'll say, well, the bishops are protecting the priests. Well, the same thing happens in the Jehovah's Witness religion. It's just with a different title.
Mm-hmm.
Elders will know things. They'll know about friends. And the most important question this is the most important question that is ever asked. Who knows about this?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer that you give to that question, it literally will determine what direction many times issues will go.
Yes,
if nobody knows about it except the 4 of us in this room, this is where it's going to stay.
Yes,
so all this stuff about concern about God's righteous stand, man, that's smoking your eyes. That's smoking your eyes.
Believe me, when I got older, I just realized to go back, like when you're talking about my education, by the time I got to high school, I was my music skills had increased exponentially. I was really, really good at playing drums. And the band director at the high school I went to came a couple times to talk to my father. My dad never really, he came to a couple games, because it was like after service, and some of the other kids' parents would come. So it was kind of a witness thing to come to the football game. And when I introduced my band director to my dad, he was telling my dad how talented I was, and that, you know, I really could go to school for music and have a really good career in music. He said I had the ability to be a professional musician. And of course, my dad wasn't trying to hear that. And at the time in the 70s and 80s, you know, there was this big thing: go to Bethel, um, go to trade school for 2 years, or go become a missionary or full-time pioneering. So as an elder son, like, I was discouraged specifically from my dad, but a lot of the climate in the congregation and the organization at the time was, you come out of high school. A lot of people dropped out of high school early. That was another big thing that a lot of people don't know. Like, a lot of kids, because they figured that the end of the world was going to come and you don't need to go to school. And, you know, me, I wanted to go to school, and I love music. And towards the end, in the end of my high school year, I applied to the local colleges. And because I didn't test very well, I was a solid A/B student, but I didn't test very well. So I didn't score high enough on my SATs to get into the local state schools: Rutgers, Trenton State, Rider College. There was, you know, the local schools in the area. But I don't know how I got these scholarships. Well, I'll go back. How I got the scholarships was my band director somehow was on this. They had this board of band directors, this band directors association, and so he got to know 4 or 5 musical directors at HBCUs, and so he spoke to the band director at Florida A&M, the band director at Southern University, and the band director at Grambling University, and they came to see me. I didn't know all of this. He used to just tell me before we went out on the field, you need to look right today. You need to look right today. And so they were coming scouting me. So at the end of my senior year, I had 3 full music scholarships. And I can remember Florida A&M is where I wanted to go because they had just done the Pepsi commercial. And 2 of my other friends from high school were going there. So it was going to be, I was hoping that it would be the 3 of us from the school going down there. And the band director at the time was Dr. Bird, who was Donald Byrd from Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds. He came to my house, my parents' house, and sat and talked to my mom for about 2 hours before my dad walked in the house. And when my dad walked in the house, the man got up and said, you know, I'm Dr. Byrd. You know, I'm here. Your son is, extremely talented. We would love to give him a full ride. And my dad said, as he's walking up the stairs, he shook the man's hand. He said, listen, we're Jehovah's Witnesses. That boy is going to school where I say he's going to school, and he don't need to study music. The end of the world is coming. And that's it. He walked upstairs, and I can remember Dr. Byrd saying to my dad, he says, I have to respect you, sir. This is your son. Because at the time I wasn't 18. He said, but one thing you need to know, he said, you're killing your son. He said, 1 or 2 things are going to happen. He said, either he's going to leave your household and never come back, or he's going to end up either on drugs or with some kind of other serious situation going on with him. And I ended up going to Trenton State College, which is like 2 blocks from my house. And by my sophomore year, I was on academic probation because I was just miserable. You know, every couple of weeks I was thrown out of the house, because I didn't, I had to go to the meetings, and it just was a mess. And so I ended up going to culinary school by default because I worked. I had enough credits to graduate in my junior year from high school, so I worked half a day and went to school half a day. And I worked for one of my classmates' families who owned a bakery and a deli. And when I found I was going to be on academic probation, I worked over the summers in college, and she said to me, she says, you're really good at cooking. She said, do you ever think about being a chef? She said, chefs, and I knew nothing about a chef. She said, chefs make really good money. She said, it's hard work. She said, but you're really good at it. And I wrote a paper, scholarship paper to Nestle Foods, and I got a scholarship to go to culinary school. And because the culinary school was in my dad's territory, my dad let me go to this community college down near Atlantic City. And part of the stipulation was that I had to go to the meetings, go out service. But I was just looking for a way to get away from my environment because it was just so toxic and debilitating. My life in the organization as a kid was it just was such a negative experience for me, because being in an organization, you're discouraged from having any kind of individuality, any kind of autonomy, any kind of discovering your self-worth, your identity. Everything is told to you and dictated to you, and so that was my life for a long time.
You know what? That had to be very hard because you were getting two messages. You get your parents partying it up, father out in the streets, doing everything he's big enough to do, and he's got leadership in the congregation, ain't even doing Bible study with you, not even really getting you involved with Watchtower curriculum. And yet when you get in these scholarships and things like that, he's like, oh, we can't do that because we're Jehovah's Witnesses. But he's not even living up to the Jehovah's Witness name.
My mother told my father, see, my mom was as pure as the driven snow. The only thing my mother ever really did was smoke cigarettes all her life, and it took her life. But my mom, I've never seen my mom drunk. I in some ways I couldn't ask for better parents because they provided for me financially. They exposed me to a lot of culture. I'm the person of who I am today. So I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I had wonderful parents, but this organization did a job on our family, and people didn't really realize it to the end. The amount of hypocrisy and covering up and deception and image, maintaining an image. They didn't know all of that. And the ones who did, there were some who knew. There were some elders who knew that might, because the elders, there was 4 or 5 elders, they all hung together. They went out and drank, they went to bars, they messed around with women, but it was all kept between the boys kind of thing. And nobody questioned it because they had the authority. But when it came to me, when I started having issues, they looked at me, well, you're the spoiled only child and your parents do everything for you, but they didn't know, the conditions under which I grew up. And a lot of what's going on with me now, as far as my reputation, my image in the organization, people don't know. And when I speak about it, they just look at me, oh, you're just complaining, you're bitter, and you decided to leave the organization. They didn't know the hell that I endured for 30, 40 years in the organization. When I look back on it, I've been around the organization for 50 years, and I never believed it. And it's hard because I had to tell my father one time, I said towards the end, I said, do you realize the position you put me in? And I started to see a psychiatrist. And one time my dad came to the session, and the psychiatrist asked my father, said, you weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, aren't you? He said, yeah. He said, but let me ask you something. He said, you pay for music lessons, right? He said, yeah. He said, but what did you think that was going to lead to? He said, most people whose kids get into music, they take lessons because they want to get into a band. They want to, play with other musicians. He said, that's what music is all about. He said, well, I let him go because I knew that was something that he could do by himself. He said, but that's not the point of being a musician. The point of being a musician and artist is to get in that community and to immerse yourself because it's a discipline. He said, so what did you think your son was going to do? Just sit in the basement and play drums by himself the rest of his life? She said, so do you realize like you were starting your son up for failure from the beginning by not supporting him? And he said, then he said, when you cut your son off from that, what effect did you think that would have on him? Why do you think he's here today at my office dealing with depression and substance abuse and those things? Why do you think he's here? because of the environment. And my dad had no choice. And then my mother smoked herself to death because she had to watch her only child live in misery for the a large part of my life. So fortunately, I was able to get away from my parents for a significant period of time and do some work in some areas. And that was the beginning of the end for me with the Jehovah's Witness organization. But I need to kind of go back. I went to school. I graduated. The school that I went to, I was the third African American to graduate from this program. I had a 3.75 average. And so because I had the average, I wasn't the valedictorian or the cum laude of the class, but I was second or third in the class. And so because of that, they allowed your parents to say something. So my dad got up there at my graduation from culinary school and went on a 45-minute public discourse about Jehovah's Witnesses and why education. They realized that I was so embarrassed and so ashamed and so angry that my dad would embarrass me like that. Like it was, instead of acknowledging my achievement, it was all about preaching, this doctrine, which he himself didn't buy into. And my mother said, Kenneth, she said, why would you do that to him? So, again, it's all about an image. And
okay, we got to double click on that. They let him talk for 45 minutes and didn't stop him?
45 minutes.
Oh my God.
In and around it, because there were other parents that went up there. I mean, it was about a 3-4 hour graduation, but the top 3 people in the class, which I was one of, they allowed their parents to speak. Some of them, both parents spoke. They take 10-15 minutes apiece, and they talked about how the child got into cooking. That was the thing. I thought my dad was going to get up there and say, yeah, he's always under his grandmothers and his aunts, and that's how he got into cooking, and I'm so proud of him. He went on this thing about, well, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we don't get it. We don't value education, even though education is important. And I'm glad my son got an education, but, the end of the world, and he started quoting scriptures about the end of the, all that stuff about the new system and how we should look to God and Jehovah. And it was just, I just wanted to find the nearest rock to crawl up under.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand one of the things that we try to emphasize on our channel is that there are really 2 aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses: what they teach and the culture. Mm-hmm. And what your story really demonstrates is the culture. Mm-hmm. The Watchtower has given us a false sense of values. Mm-hmm. The values are literally upside down in terms of reality, in terms of the real world in which we live in. Jehovah's Witnesses, they operate upside down. What we consider right and what others consider wrong, they've been flipped. Mm-hmm. Doing well in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses means you do bad. I mean, it's just a constant. The value system is just literally turned upside down. Other people rejoice when their children do well. Witnesses, they're ashamed when their children doing well. I mean, it's crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think the point that you made about how the psychiatrist asked your father, what did you think? And it really goes to show the type of cognitive dissonance that a witness has. On one hand, they want you to do certain things, but then they realize I got to pull back because organization. And that's what kind of happened to you. I just wanted to just make the point that you mentioned about your opportunity to get into historical Black college and through the band program. And anyone who is familiar with historical Black colleges, the bands many times are bigger than the football teams in terms of excitement on the college campus and how it's viewed in the community. And the gentleman that you had to deal with who came to your house, Dr. Donald Byrd, many people are actually very familiar with him. They may not know exactly who he is, mm-hmm. but he became one of the professors at Howard University. Mm-hmm. And part of his thesis was he basically put together a little band. Yep. And that band became known as the Blackbirds, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And if you go online, you will see that the Blackbirds, what really was just a project that him and some of his students were doing, it turned into literally a career opportunity because his band went on to perform some huge hits back in the 70s.
Yeah.
One of them that we are familiar with because we live here in Washington, D.C., is called Rock Creek Park.
Yes, sir.
And Rock Creek Park is an area. Yeah, Rock Creek
Uh-huh.
Park is an area here in D.C. As if you live in Philadelphia, everybody knows what the plateau is. Well, here in Washington, D.C., we have what's called Rock Creek Park. And they have all types of summer activities out there. And he made a huge hit off doing that. And the point is to think that here is a person who looked at your talent, looked at your skill, and said, "This dude is good."
Yeah, well, see, I ran the percussion section. My fellow students, including the band director, wanted me to be the drum major. But I love playing drums so much, and because we went to a higher proportion white to black high school, I was the one who brought our music up to time. So we were playing old stuff, and I went to the director and said, "Listen, we can't be playing this stuff from the 70s. We need to be playing this, this, and this. And we need to, like instead of just a 4/4, we need to be out there dancing." Like I was already ahead of myself in terms of the times and what other bands. Now we had inner city schools that were doing some pretty innovative things, and I wanted to do that because when you're at a football game, y'all battling in the stand, and so my high school became one of the better bands when I was at my high school. And to go back to Dr. Bird, he had left Howard and came to Florida A&M when I met him. He had been at Howard for a long time, and Howard, if anybody doesn't know, was like the Juilliard or the Berkeley for HBCUs as far as fine arts. I mean, you got Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack, and
absolutely,
like the list just goes on. But that same day, when he left, I ended up, because I was so mad at my father. I always had access to the music room at my high school, and so I went to the high school, and Dr. Bird had went up there to talk to the band director to tell them. When I got there, they were talking about them Jehovah's Witness people. I walked in on them. He said, "How can this?" Just listening to them, how can they do this to their kids? But the drummer for the Commodores was there. I met him, and he had seen me play, and he encouraged me to keep playing. But he was a graduate and alumni of Florida A&M.
Yeah.
And Florida A&M had just the year before in '83, they had just done that Pepsi commercial. I don't know if you remember that. That was the first black college to do a commercial. And so I would be part of the 100 Rattlers, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah. And this is why we need for you to tell your story, because see, when we put this up on the internet, there are going to be so many people who were either raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, baptized or unbaptized, who this story is going to resonate with them. And the reason it's going to resonate with them is because there are literally thousands and thousands of Jehovah's Witness kids all around the world who have had their teachers, their professors, pull their parents to the side and say, "Your child is talented. Let this child's talent grow." And the witness parent shut it down. Shut it down.
I will say this. This is something else that people need to know, especially if you grew up in the 70s and 80s. Because of the culture in the organization, a lot of people that I grew up with, I would say 70% of the people I grew up with aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Most of them never became. The ones who did that I know aren't in the organization anymore. 30% are still in the organization, and for them it works, or they have that malleability, that personality that accepts that form of high control and manipulation. But what people need to know is that in the organization at that time, a lot of my friends, once you got 17, 18, if you want to get baptized, it's out. You got put out. And a lot of people turned to drugs, alcohol. Some committed suicide. Some went to jail, because they just were on the street, and totally isolated from any kind of support system, and a lot of us made some wrong choices. But we didn't have the coping skills and to deal with those sort of situations and circumstances. A lot of us were ill-equipped, and the more I talk to people who I grew up with, the more commonality we have in our stories. Some of us managed to make it through, and others just, I know 2 or 3 people that are still in mental institutions, can never quite get themselves together, in and out of jail, strung out on drugs and alcohol, could never really get themselves together. And so people need to know that, like, this whole process that you guys are involved in, this work that you're doing, this is solace for a lot of us. It helps us in the healing process. And I hope that my story helps other people who don't know what to do. A lot of people just stay in the organization because they don't want to lose their families. They don't want to lose their friends, their social circle. Most people that I know, I don't think a lot of people truly believe what the organization has as far as doctrine. They just stay because it's just become a way of life for them, and they're miserable. They won't admit it, but they're miserable. And I just got to the point where, for me, I wanted to live. I was tired of dying, and I had to make some decisions. So
Yeah, they stay for the social aspect. And interestingly, it's interesting because the data actually backs up what you've said. The Pew study, which dealt with all religions in America, what they showed was that the Jehovah's Witnesses, as a religious denomination, they have one of the highest churn rates. People coming in and leaving. And their young people have the highest rate of individuals who leave the faith. That is an absolute fact.
I can remember my dad studied. He brought, well, you did the term. He brought a lot of people into the truth. You know that saying, right? So,
oh yeah,
my dad studied with a lot of people. My parents helped a lot of people come into the organization. But there was a family they were a young family. They had 2 young children, much younger than I was at the time. And the husband, his dad, owned a very lucrative business. I don't know whether it was cleaning or it was a hardware store, but it was a lucrative business. And they studied with my parents, and they were like, well, you sure this is the end? And this is 1975 going into 1976. My dad was like, yes. The prophecy tells it, all the scriptures and the material from the literature was pointing to 1975 as the end of the world. And so this man, newly married with 2 young children, gave up his business, donated a large part of the money to the society, and bought a house with the other piece of the money, and took a job in the same industry but working for somebody now. 1975 came and went. 1976 came and went. And 1977 came. And I can remember this man ringing our doorbell. And when I opened the door, he was like, tell your father to come out here right now. And he said, you lied to me. And it was nothing my father could say. He wanted to literally fight my father on our doorstep because he felt that betrayed. His marriage was on the rocks. And they later got this fellowship. I don't know what for, but they never came back. But that was just another awakening moment for me to see that, all the while, it's interesting. Like, one of the things I wanted to say was with critical thinking, like when intuition and critical thinking go hand in hand, and common sense. A lot of this stuff is common sense. Like, it's right there in your face. Look at it. Look at all the failed prophecy, false doctrine, all these things, and now the exposure. And the society does not want to accept the fact that they've misled people for over 100 years. And they continue. Now they're playing the shell game. Now this is overlapping generation. At one time, it was the 1914, and there's no real empirical evidence to bolster what they're saying is true. But people, because of the indoctrination is so strong, and people, it's funny how people want to believe something that's so incredible. The more incredible you make it, the more they believe it. They just have to believe in something. And you know, one of the things that woke me up was like, I don't have to believe that, especially when I can look at it and see that it's not true. Um, and it's interesting how they just label people. You know, I've watched so many of the broadcasts. They're so good at um, critically analyzing the society's broadcast, using their information to expose them. And I said this to my dad. I said before he died, I said, you know, the society is talking about how they're the only true God's organization, but they read the scripture how God is going to expose it. What do you think if the reality is that Jehovah's exposing the Jehovah's Witness organization in according to scriptural prophecy? See, they don't want to acknowledge that. But it's happening though. You know, with the child molestation, the cases all over the world, especially in Australia. Um, you know, it's just sad, and they just get caught out. I listened to the lies. I forgot the elder from the governing body under oath. They use a scripture about disfellowshipping and disassociation, and they asked him, said, well, um, they said, well, the congregation deals with these individuals. That's a lie. The elders deal with these individuals. The scripture in the context of what it's saying is that if a brother commits to sin against you, you have something against him, you go to him. If he doesn't understand, if he doesn't change his attitude, you take two more with you. If they don't are not able to justify or rectify the situation, what's the next thing in the scripture? It says, take them before the congregation. It says nothing about judicial committee or body of elders. It says take them before the congregation. Why? Because if you took them before the congregation, now you got 100 people with different life experience that can look on a situation and maybe have more of an impact on the outcome. But no, they manipulate the scripture, and they went from take it to the congregation to form a judicial committee. And the congregation doesn't deal with the disfellowship, and the elders disfellowship the person. Then they announce to the congregation that person is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. They that's always the case. They like we said before, man. When you write your own rules to the game, you can't lose. I mean, it's just that simple. You're barking up a tree that you'll never climb, because it's their ball, their rules, their court. All you bring is your little tennis shoes with you. That's all you got.
Right.
Yeah.
So Darrin, you said that, you know, you had started off, you embarked in this career trying to get into music. You didn't get a chance to do that. Then you went to school to be a chef, and you graduated at the top of your class.
Mm-hmm.
So what type of work are you doing now? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm right now. I'm a private chef. I've been a chef instructor. I taught it. I taught for a couple of nonprofit agencies. I'm going back to get my master's in social work. I want to be and get my graduate certificate in nonprofit leadership, because I want to have my own nonprofit organization focusing on voc rehab. I think culinary arts is a viable means of procuring marketable job skills, and I've had the privilege to work with some people who have done that. And so it's kind of inspired me. But right now, I'm a private chef. I'm not going to say this person's name, but her mom is one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's how I met her. She's a client of mine. I've worked for athletes and entertainers, and I've traveled with them. But right now, that's what I'm doing. I'm a private chef, and I also work in the field of mental health. So because of my life experience, I'm able to reach people who are at risk. So I work sometimes in a clinical setting. I do life skills workshops. I work with people in recovery, and I do community outreach. So that's what I'm doing currently. You know, I've had a great career as a chef. Those people who know me, that's what they call me, chef. I've traveled. I've worked in the Caribbean. I've worked all over the United States, primarily up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Was in Texas for a while because I worked with a person who played for the NBA, and I worked with him up until he died. And I worked for another person who retired from one of the teams in down there in Texas. But I would like to talk about how I started waking up from this organization. For me, it was just so I got baptized in 1990. And it's interesting. The day I got baptized, I was sitting in the bar drinking and smoking weed at the time because I got baptized just to fit in, and I spent the majority of my life trying to please my parents, and it's sad. And it took a long time for me to admit that. And a lot of people in this organization, a lot of kids, that's what they do. And it took a lot for me. I've been through treatment and therapy. It took a lot for me to get to where I am today. The person you see before you is not the person that you would have known 20, 30 years ago. I've had to come through a lot. But by 1994, I was 92. 92, I got this fellowship. I came back in 1996, I think. I got reinstated. And then by 97, I disassociated myself because at that point, that was the beginning of me kind of waking up. It's interesting. What happened was I just would run into people in the settings that I was in who were Jehovah's Witness kids dealing with the same issue I was dealing with. And so that was the beginning of me talking to other people like we're talking now as a support system. And I started listening to their experience because I thought I was, what I was dealing with, I thought I was by myself. I thought I was the only one dealing with it. And then I found out that I'm not by myself and that this is a common experience. So I disassociated myself and I stayed out. I got a really good job in New York. I worked in New York off and on for about 12 years. The company I worked for, and I was going to the hall off and on, but it wasn't like I was more focused on more therapeutic things to help me deal with the issues I was having. So I was in other support groups, other fellowships. And what ended up happening was the job I had closed. And for me, because I had never finished college, even though I went to culinary school, I was ashamed. That was a lot of, I carried a lot of guilt and shame. And that's one of the things I like to say to people, please, this organization will manipulate you and ruin your life through guilt and shame. It's one of the main things that they use to control people. And it's so, so, so toxic. So if you're dealing with that, please get help because you can't carry this by yourself. That's the ultimate message I want to say to people. Don't deal with this on your own. Seek professional help because mental illness is real. You need to be able to establish support groups. And the work that you guys are doing is so important to help people like me, like us, who have suffered for so long, living a life in an organization that is so controlling and manipulative and really has ruined a lot of people's lives. And I'm not sitting here bashing the organization. It's just a fact. But going back to me waking up, when I disassociated myself in 97, my job ended in New York. So I worked as a private chef. I traveled, but around 2000, I started working in New York. And I worked in New York to, I think, 2013. the company, they sold the brand, so I took a severance and I lived off of this money. But long story short, I moved back home, which was a definite no-no look in retrospect. But my dad talked me into coming back home, and I said, well, I could save money. I could go finish my degree. And for about a year, everything was okay. But then my dad, the brothers was pressuring him because I was living in his house. I was disassociated. So my dad started going on these rampages. You know, I had to go to meetings or I got to hit the street. So I started going back to the hall. And in 2000, let me go back. I think it was 2010, I got reinstated. And from 2010 to 2014, I was traveling a lot. So my publisher's card, even though I was pretty much inactive, but wherever I traveled, I would go to the meetings, I would go out in service, but I was never part of the congregation. So when I moved to Delaware, I came down here in 14. I hadn't really been going to the hall at all, but it's all I knew. My cousin brought me down here to Delaware, and he was part of the AME church. And it's funny how, I don't know if it's God or the universe shows you things. I went to this church, and the pastor of this church was a former Jehovah's Witness. And when I told her, she was like, well, where did you go to church? I said, I was hesitant because I was kind of ashamed. And when I said Kingdom Hall, she looked at the other pastors. She looked at me. I said, oh, well, you got, and we knew the same people. We hung in the same circles, but we didn't know each other. And she told me her story and how she came out of AME church, and she met a guy in the hall. They got married, and the marriage is a mess. And she ended up going back to the AME church. Now she's a pastor in the AME church. But that was the start of me, and she started sharing some information with me. But she did it in a way like she didn't really try to influence me one way or the other. But she would say some critical things to me. And over that period of time, I started thinking about it. But fast forward, started going to the congregation down here in Delaware. And when I got into the congregation, of course, the brother sent the publisher's card. And see, this is stuff I didn't know. But they sent a report ahead of me. And I can remember when I got to this one congregation, they treated me pretty well until they got my publisher's card. And then the brother stopped speaking to me. I come to the meeting and normally, hey, and then all of a sudden it's like they're not coming over to speak to me. And I went to the secretary and said, did you get my publisher's card? He said, yeah, I got all the information I need to know about you, buddy. And I said, wait a minute, what happened? So one of the brothers who was a Bethelite, him and I got into it because when my wife and I started dating, it's funny how they want to be so in control of every aspect of your life. Now, mind you, I'm a new brother in the congregation. They treated me with such suspicion. And when my wife and I started dating, I can remember we went into the supermarket, and it was a sister that saw her. Now, we weren't holding hands. We were just going into the supermarket together. I was traveling too as a private chef at the time. So that weekend I went away, and my wife called me and she says, the brothers had me and my mother in the library questioning us about you. And see, my mother-in-law was like, she's one of them. They didn't grow up in the hall. And she laid him out. She said, listen, y'all need to leave me to so alone. Don't be questioning. You got any questions about Darrin? Y'all need to talk to Darrin. She said, I told my wife that I think he would make a great husband. Him and I got a connection. I don't see anything spiritually or otherwise that's wrong with him. So when I got back, they pulled me in the library. Me and my wife were in the library about 4 or 5 times while we was dating. And I finally told the elders, I said, listen, I said, my father will be down here because my dad came down to meet my wife and my in-laws before we got married. And one of the brothers in the congregation knew my dad because he's from Jersey, and they were on the building committee or whatever it was, had known each other for 30-something years. And so the elders saw that my dad was on a level. So they kind of backed off from me for a while. But the breaking point for me was I was going out service regularly. and I was attending the meetings. I was commenting. I was visiting the friends, especially the elderly and the shut in. And I was dating my wife, and I was trying to be the model person, wanting to get married and maybe try to reach out for privileges in the congregation. But anyway, I lived on the beach at the time, and they used to do the cart work. So after service, I was renting a room at the time. I would go up there and just hang out with the friends on the boardwalk and the cart work. Well, one of the elders came up to me at a meeting and was like, "Well, brother, it's been brought to our attention that you're in the cart work, and we want to tell you that we don't want you up on the boardwalk because we don't know you." And nothing scriptural, nothing from the branch, no backup as far as what he's counseling me on. So I didn't say nothing to him. I was extremely angry. I wanted to cuss him out. But I told my wife what happened. And we got married. And right after we got married, they had a list. And there's one brother came up to my wife, said, "Oh, sister so-and-so, would you, what schedule do you want?" And I'm looking at him. I said, "Wait a minute, how are you going to come to my wife in front of me as I'm the head of the house and ask her about being in the cart work when that's something that we should be doing as a couple?" I said, "That's an embarrassment to me. My wife qualifies, but I don't qualify." So I went back to these brothers, and they told me, they came with the thing from the branch office, and it was a scripture about moderate in dress, gets along with others. It was something to that, but it was something that I qualified for. I fit the qualifications, but because they didn't know me. See, that's another thing. It is a culture within culture. They call these people down here in Delaware the Mennonites. Like, if you didn't grow up down here, they don't know you. They treat you like an outsider. And like they thought I dressed too. I'm coming with bow tie. I'm a city guy. These are country people. They thought I dressed too worldly and too, too flashy or whatever. And I said, "What does that have to do with preaching God's word?" And I said, "You come at me." And then the suggestion was, now mind you, I'm traveling, and at the time I got a job as a department manager in a major high-end supermarket. They told me, "Well, in order for us to give you the privilege of being out on the cart work, you need to be seen out on Saturdays, and maybe you need to tell your boss to let you off." I said, "So now you telling me how to run my household?" I said, "You're going to pay my bills if I take Saturday off so that I could be in the cart work?" So I stopped going to the hall, and I started, because I had already been looking at XJW websites. And at first, I was going through that cognitive dissonance in my, in the back of my head. The programming told me you shouldn't be doing this, but then the intuition in me, the common sense in me, said this feels right. So spiritually and intuitively, I was being fed, and so it just changed my whole outlook. And I started to wake up. I was like, "This is a bunch of nonsense. This organization is just about controlling people." This one elder who I'm still friends with, he told me that this one brother, he came down here to branch office, appointed him CO. They sent him here to this congregation. They sent him with a letter. The circuit overseer had come and told them that this is your new CO. You know what they did? They took a vote, and they decided not only not to make him an elder, but they went totally against what the branch office and the circuit overseer had done. So I said, now I'm dealing with a congregation that does what they want to do. And it took the circuit overseer coming back and threatening to dissolve the whole elder body for them to follow their instructions. So this is the kind of stuff that started waking me up. And the final straw for me was my mother died a few months before my wife and I got married. And then when my dad died, I received no support from the brothers back home and from the brothers down here. And I hadn't been to the Kingdom Hall in about 3-4 years. And I went to the Kingdom Hall one day, and this one brother came up to me and he says, "How you doing?" I said, "Do you really care?" I said, that's a question that when you ask somebody how they're doing, do you really care?" I said, "You haven't seen me in almost 4 years." I said, "But when me and my wife was dating, you was all in our business." I said, "But now you haven't seen me." I said, "Do you really?" I said, "Let me ask you a question. When you go out knocking on doors, do you tell people, well, if you stop coming, if you stop doing this and that, we ain't going to support you. We don't want nothing to do with you." But that's the truth. I said, "You call me your brother." I said, "You're not my brother." I said, "Because I got brothers in a fraternity I'm involved in. They send me emails. They got a reclamation process. They trying to reclaim brothers. They actively try and encourage brothers to stay involved in organization." I said, "This organization doesn't do that." And I said, "I came down here. You don't know my circumstances, the situation." So what I ended up doing was one night I was sitting home and I was on this, I was on Baroni and Pickett's website. And I don't know which lecture he was giving, but I just got filled with so much anger. I went to the hall. This is when they was locking the halls at once the meeting started. And this one brother was outside. He was like, "Hey, brother, so and so, it's Brother Clark, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm good." I said, he said, "You okay?" I said, "No." And it was like just as the meeting was just about to be over. So he let me in the hall. And after now I'm in street clothes. So I went to the coordinator. I said, "I want to see all the elders in the library." So all the elders except for 2 came to the library. And I said to them, I said, "Y'all," I really wanted to say some choice words, but I said, "Y'all full of nonsense." I said, "I've been down here X amount of years. When I was dating my wife, you guys were all in our business." I said, "Now I have lost my mother, my father." I said, "I've struggled through a lot of things." I said, "Not once did I get a phone call, no shepherding call, nothing." I said, "And y'all," I said, "is this really about the end?" I said, and I read the scripture about if you lose one sheep, you leave the 99 and go. I said, this is what you really do to people?" I said, "There's no love." I said, "What does the scripture say? That you will know that God is with you because you'll have love among you." I said, "There's no love here." I said, "Jehovah's Holy Spirit isn't here. This isn't his house." I said, "Because you treat people with such disregard." I said, "If they don't show up, it's like out of sight, out of mind." I said, "And that's the reason why you ain't got to worry about me coming back here." And I said, "I'm not going on a campaign preaching to people, don't go to the hall." I said, "But you ain't got to worry about me coming." And I ain't been back since then. So it's been 5 years since I've actually went to a meeting on a regular basis. And for me, my wife, we have a great relationship. I'm not going to say much about my wife, but I told you we just understand that she's active, I'm not. We don't talk about religion. But my wife, see, this is how the universe works. I married somebody who's from the organization, right? But somebody who didn't grow up in it. But she got to see from my dad and from the people that I grew up with why I'm the way I am. So she doesn't judge me. You know what I mean? Like, she supports me. She actually, when you guys first called me, we got into it, but she said, "You know what? I support you in that because you need that." She says, "You need to heal." She said, "For me, I'm going to continue because it works for me, but if you never come back to the hall," she said, "but the life that I had 15, 16 years ago that was so self-destructive," she said, "I'd rather see you do this and continue on your path because my life has changed so much because I just started to take responsibility for my own healing process." And I'm at a point where, you know what, they see this video. like I said to you when we started talking, I said, I'm not disassociating myself and giving them the authority to label me. I still have a few people in the organization that I deal with. There's an elder that just took us out to the jazz festival. He calls me maybe every 30, 60 days. He may call me. You know what I mean? He's good for he I respect that. And I told him, I said, "You're doing what God's telling you to do as far as shepherding the flock." I said, I can read, there's 2 or 3 elders in this congregation. There's 2 really. that I got respect for. I said, because they have called me. They have reached out to me to see if I'm doing okay from time to time. And this one brother, it's funny, the coordinator, when he found out my story and he found out how the elders, my wife said she went to the hall one day and he gave a talk and 3 or 4 elders had to walk out. He said, "You're running Jehovah's people out of this congregation.
Oh yeah.
Treating people, you should be ashamed of yourself." And he read some scriptures and it, the brothers had to, but since then they've dissolved. They brought elders from Philly and New York and DC. They brought elders here because the territory here is very rural. And a lot of times they needed more people who were semi-retired and retired that could help them, as far as working. But now all that's because COVID shut down all of that. But the congregation has changed. But I'm done.
Yeah, you've been through a lot, Darrin. Oh my God.
Yeah. And see, people don't know. They just, when you mention my name to a person that knows me, they'll just think, oh, he was this, he's that. But they don't know what I dealt with. And that's why I said I needed to tell my story, because people need to know the truth about the truth. I don't hate the organization. I just know that it's done a lot of damage to people. And there's hundreds of thousands of us, kids who have gone through so much because of the culture and the indoctrination and how our parents critically misuse and manipulate their children. I think the scriptures talk about do not be irritating your children. Like there was a talk, the last assembly I went to, the brother gave a talk about building fire resistant materials or something. It was some kind of talk, but it was at the assembly. So they expounded on it. And my dad started crying. He had to walk out because that day he admitted to me and my wife, he said, "You know what?" He said, "I ruined my son." He said, "I realized I did a lot of damage to you." He said, and I know that I'm gonna have to pay for that. He said, "But I just need to admit that to you." He said, "I ruined my son." He said, "I put you in a instead of letting you go off and do what you wanted to do." And he meant well. That's the thing I will say. My dad meant well, but his methods were not. His methods were not good.
You know what, too, Darrin? I remember you stated that the Jehovah's Witness kids were doing the same thing that the worldly kids were doing in the neighborhood. And it's interesting because everybody knows that it's like kids do things when they're young. And then they get to a certain part of their life where they pick up the pieces and they go off to college and they become captains of industry and they do all these things that normal people do. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not allowed to do anything because they're always waiting for the end to come. They're never given an opportunity to, exercise the strengths and the talents that they have. So, it's a normal life. I mean, because you talk to a lot of kids. A lot of kids smoke reefer and drink. They weren't supposed to drink because that's what they thought they were supposed to do at the time. But it's like talking to you. It's like the Jehovah's Witness kids never recover.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder about the other kids. I wonder about these other kids that weren't witnesses. Where are they today?
The thing is, like, going back when my dad found out I was smoking weed, he realized 20, 30 years later, and between the time he found out and see my dad, my uncles, they hung out. We call them the Brat Pack, right? They would take us. I would go to my aunt's house in Jersey City, New York, or whatever, and they would take off, going to the store supposedly to get ice or whatever. They'd be gone. They come back 11, 12 o'clock at night. Now these jokers hanging out in bars, they smoke weed, they whatever. But my uncle exposed my dad one time because I remember my cousin came down. See, I wasn't allowed to spend any time around my cousins other than, and I need to go back to, because my grandmother's, my mother's mother came into the organization, and my father's mother moved to Trenton with us in 72. And she later became a witness and a full-time pioneer. But both my father's mother came out of the church, And what I found out later was, as a full-time pioneer, my grandmother had 4 sisters, but the oldest sister was deep into the church. And so when my grandmother would go spend time with her, she would go to church with my aunt. And she did that for years until my grandmother came into the organization. And see, then when they went to Jersey City or they went other place, they would go together. And that was kind of her pioneer partner, her witness partner. They lived in the same building. But I didn't know all this. There's a lot of stuff I started finding out about my family as I got older. Like when my uncle came down and I wanted to go, I'd never been to my uncle's house. He lived in Long Island. And I asked my dad. My dad chased me out the house with a bat. And I was like, for asking to go spend a week, my cousin could come down here and spend a week, but I can't go spend a week at my uncle's house. The reason why was I didn't know this, but my uncle and my cousin's mother were not married. So my father, you're not going up there, they're living together. So what does that have to do with me going to spend? I'm 15, 16, 17 years old. Or I think I was 16 or 17 years old. What does that matter to me? I'm not involved in that. But when that happened, my uncle said, man, you fool of you know what? He said, does Darrin know that you were smoking weed and you turned over 2 cars under the influence of marijuana, but yet you're going to take this boy to the elders and he ain't even baptized? So that's the kind of stuff I look back on it now and I laugh about it. But that caused me a lot of anger, a lot of self-destructive behavior. It was a lot of things that happened to me in retrospect that I've had to come through and realize and understand that that's not my fault. I don't have to own that. I just was a child who grew up in an organization that was extremely strictly indoctrinated. And so that's what my parents used to try to raise me. And because they didn't set the example, it did even more damage. And so as I got older, it turned me into an unproductive, self-destructive person in a lot of ways. And once I understood that, and I got some relief from the guilt and shame of religion, because a lot of I'm not Jehovah's Witnesses ain't the only ones that do this to their kids. I just started to heal from that. So that's one of the main reasons I wanted to tell my story, because I want people to understand how you can heal from this and what you can do to get through these challenges. And a big part of it is letting go of the guilt and shame, letting go of the doctrination, and understanding that this is a man-made religion. It's run by men. And what's dangerous, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day. He saw some of the stuff I was posting on Facebook and started questioning me. I said, listen, I said, you didn't grow up like I did, even though we grew up together. I said, well, you didn't grow up like I did. I said, you knew how I grew up. I said, and for me, I look at this organization like I looked at some of the other things I was involved in. I don't ever want to go back to it. And so I moved on. And my life is so exponentially better. Like I'm so much more at peace with myself. I'm happy. I can look in the mirror today and I'm not full of guilt and shame. My self-worth, my self-esteem, because the organization just does a job on people and they have no identity. And then when they find themselves in a crisis, like the book Crisis of Conscience, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to turn. And I was doing a graduate paper, and I did it was on religion, and I looked up some information on the Jehovah's Witness organization in Japan and China. It's something about that Asian culture. There's a high rate of suicide and alcohol. High rate of suicide. One of the highest in those countries is among Jehovah's Witnesses. It was astonishing for me, and they had all the statistics and the empirical evidence to prove that. But yeah, the society, they'll talk about apostasy. You know, when you look at how they label people, they don't even attack the issues. They don't even address the issues that people are talking about. They just label people. And it's the same thing that the government does, you know. And I started looking at terms like the governing body, you know, and this is a corporation. You know, you have presidents. Like, it's funny, they didn't want you to be involved in school with any government. You couldn't be part of student government, student body, but yet they call themselves the governing body. And when I looked at the governing body, it talks about a group of people that has the authority to exercise governments over an organization or political body. And it really spoke to political body because they associate governance with politics. But yet the society calls their leaders the governing body. So you got to look at it from common sense. They're really telling you who they are and what they're about. It's right in your face. You got to open your eyes and see it.
Well, Darrin, you have really opened up and poured your heart out, and your story has been very compelling. I mean, it's a lot, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that.
Absolutely.
We talk to so many people that have been there from the lower end to the upper end of what you're talking about, and then all in between. So I
never served as a servant. Like before I got just a fellowship. Like the next time they told me the next time the circuit overseer come, they were going to recommend me. But by then I was having some issues and I got this fellowship. I never served. Like the only thing I handled on mics, I had parts I was in the dramas and stuff like that. I used to read. Remember, I used to have the book studies in people's homes, so I read with the elder. You know, I did microphones. I had some privileges, but I never was a ministerial servant elder. I auxiliary pioneered a couple times. But I never held, I never had it. Went to Bethel a couple times, but I never believed this stuff. Even from the time I was a little kid, I never believed it. I just went along, for 40 something years, almost 50 years. I just went along. And that's a hell of a thing to have to deal with, knowing you're doing something that's going against your true nature, your true intuitive self. But see, what people don't realize is that you can't separate God and the governing body. You can't do that because it's the same. They're telling you that they're speaking for Jehovah.
Yep,
but yet, when they get caught on the carpet with their doctrine and imperfectness, right? They want to use it. Well, man isn't perfect, but yet they're talking about God, Jehovah is perfect. So it's either you're making a mistake or God's making a mistake, right? Which is one of the things you guys say all the time. Like, you get them, you paint them in a corner, and it's like, what can they have? No, it's funny. It really is. It's like they have no recourse but to say, well, just trusting Jehovah.
That's right.
But you're trusting in man.
Right.
You can't separate the two.
That's true.
Technology is just really exposing them because it's really doing a job. I was watching one of the videos you guys posted about the 1914 and all that. And I watched something you were talking about the apostates and how they label apostates and they never address the issues. They're so carefully scripted. Like, this is so divisive. People just can't see it. They cannot see it. Yeah. It's sad.
It is. I think this is a really good therapeutic session for you.
Yeah, it is.
And I really feel like people, once they can get this off their chest, I mean, we've got emails from you and stuff, and you were like, some of the things that you said in the email to us, I hear it coming out, what you're saying, but I really feel like you really got it out now because you're actually talking about it, which is good. Yeah. And people really need to, it's like recovery. It's the same thing. That's what I was telling you with recovery from anything, right? This process, there's steps to it. But the most therapeutic steps are letting go and talking about it and telling somebody else about it because you carry so much weight and so much burden. And what's destructive about carrying that, right, is the guilt and shame and all those things that are toxic to you intrinsically. You have to let go of and understand that you didn't cause it, but you're responsible for what you do from this point on. So I got to a point where,
I'm not looking for anybody to feel sorry for me or whatever, but people need to know the truth. And the truth is not bashing the organization. The truth is the truth. The truth never changes, right? 2 + 2 = 4. 1 + 1 = 2. It never changes, but the truth that they're talking about always changes. You know, every time you turn around, they're talking about new light and this and that. And I'm saying, wait a minute, but you talking about this is the truth. So how does the truth change? You know what I mean? I was born black 50-something years ago. I'm still black. You know what I'm saying? They ain't changed. I'm my father's son. I say some crazy stuff, but it is what it is. It doesn't change, right?
Right.
It never changes. So if it's the truth, it doesn't change.
We want to thank you so much for being on our program and telling your story. That was very compelling.
Absolutely.
Story. So this has been Lady C.
And this has been JT.
And we'll see you all on the next episode.
Thank you so
Hey,
much.
man, I tell you, it was good. It was interesting.
Take care.
We invite you to share this video with your family and friends to help them to understand the inconsistencies of the Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, if you have not already done so, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. And not only that, be sure to hit that little bell so that you can get notifications when we upload new content. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we look forward to having you in our audience in future videos. We thank you so much for being in our audience.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.